very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Mayhem, chaos and panic has spread across the world after the discovery of a new variation of the coronavirus in South Africa. So here's what happened. Yesterday, the South African government held a press conference to talk about a new variant that they have found, and they say that it's a variant of concern because it has double the mutations in spike protein that the Delta variant, which is the most predominant variant in the world right now, has. Now, countries across the world have pressed the panic button in various ways. There are concerns about how far it would spread. More and more nations are reporting 1 or 2 cases so far of people who have the new variant. The concerns are whether this variant will be able to pass through the immunity that vaccines have provided so far. The World Health Organization is holding a meeting to decide what to do next, and they will possibly make a decision on whether to call this a variant of concern or a variant of interest. Meanwhile, international markets have taken a beating. American markets hit badly in opening trade. The Dow down almost 900 points. European markets all down between 2.5% to 3% and even more. Indian markets also took a massive beating today. So we will look at this point by point. We will tell you what we know so far factually about the new variant, whether India should worry with where we stand right now with our levels of coronavirus infections, and we're also going to be talking to experts on how world markets are reacting and how long that pain will continue. So all of that on the show this evening. It's of course our big story, but before we get to it, let me take you through what's trending tonight. Global authorities react with alarm to a new coronavirus variant detected in South Africa, with the EU, UK, Germany among those tightening border controls and banning or restricting flights from South Africa and its neighboring countries. Meanwhile, India decides to resume commercial international passenger flights from December 15th. 14 countries, though, including UK, France, Germany and South Africa, have been put on a list which will have additional restriction for passengers travelling to India. Commercial flights will resume for the first time after they were suspended in March last year. And concerns over the new South African variant wreak havoc across global markets. Indices on Wall Street in free fall. Dow down over 900 points. European stocks slide over 2.6%. Asian markets too clock steep cuts. No entry for corporate entities to own banks, says the RBI. They, however, accept majority of the recommendations made by the internal working group. The central bank says there is no need for a cap on promoter holdings for the initial 5 years, but adds that a cap on promoter stake in long run could be raised to 26% in private banks. And companies across sectors begin to pass on increases in input costs post the festive season. Consumers are feeling the pinch. It's not just tomatoes. Everything from detergents, soaps, cosmetics, electronics, appliances, and even your phone bills have gotten more expensive. All right, let's talk about B11529, the new variant that has been discovered in South Africa. And let's just start with a few of the basics before we move on to the rest of our coverage. So there is no surprise that a new variant has been found. Several new variants have been found and are found at regular intervals by different authorities in many countries. Why is this one raising concerns? Well, this variant, which could possibly be assigned the Greek alphabet nu, is raising concerns because it has the most mutations than any other variant so far. So if the Delta had the most mutations so far, this new variant has surpassed it. In fact, it has 30 mutations on its spike protein, which is double that of Delta. That is what is bothering people. The concern is that it could really escape immunity, which vaccinations have provided. So it has a mutation known as the S gene dropout. That's what's concerning scientists. And the World Health Organization is going to take possibly a few weeks to look into it and understand what's happening. Where did it come from? Nobody knows. There's a lot of speculation and guesstimating in the scientific community. In fact, one scientist at the UCL Genetics Institute in London has speculated that it is likely evolved because of a chronic infection in an HIV/AIDS patient from COVID-19, and that is why you've got this now super variant, for lack of a better word, which has so many mutations. The world is still figuring out what it means. Meanwhile, uncertainty is something that markets don't like. Let's take a look at what's happening in the US markets as we speak. The Dow down 869 points, a quarter of 3% down. S&P 500 down nearly 2%. The Nasdaq also down about 1.5%. And it's been like that across the world. Europe has been brutalized pretty much by fears of this variant. And remember, Europe was already reeling from the worst of the Delta variant. They're still dealing with that. So the DAX down about 3.5%, the FTSE as well as the CAC about between 3.5% to 4.5%. Let me just quickly tell you what happened with Indian markets today. Indian markets also had a bad spell. The Sensex Nifty both completely hammered. Now, why are markets reacting like this? We know why they're reacting like this. They're afraid of the variant, but how long will this continue? Hugh Albert Johnson with us right now, Chairman and CIO of Hugh Johnson Advisors. Hugh, thank you so much for speaking with us right here on ET Now. Your take on why the markets are reacting now, because like I mentioned, large parts of Europe have been going through their worst phase of the pandemic so far. Is there enough reason for this new variant and what we know about it so far to scare markets to this degree?
No, there's not. It's way too early. We don't know if it's really going to be easily transmitted. We don't know that. We don't know if it's vaccine resistant, which is, of course, the key question. And if it is vaccine resistant, that, of course, implies that there are going to be a renewed lockdowns and the economy will suffer from it. But it's way too early to reach that conclusion. There are a lot of investors, particularly in the U.S., that are kind of shoot now and ask questions later. They're very, very edgy. We've had a real move up in stock prices. It's reached levels that are arguably overvalued. And as a result of that, you have a lot of investors that, quite frankly, want to simply take their profits. They've been on edge. They wanted to take profits for a while now. And this was the excuse to do it. But as far as having fundamental information, which would be sufficient to get you to change your portfolio, reduce your allocation to equities, it's way too early. Everybody's got to wait and get much more information. I look for information from the World Health Organization, and hopefully it comes sooner as opposed to later, but nevertheless, too early to make decisions.
You mentioned something very interesting, Hugh. You're saying it's an opportunity to dump stocks that have run up. And do you think that that's what really is happening here? And if that's the case, do you think that this panic will ease? It's not going to be too persistent.
I don't think this is going to be persistent, but I say that with my fingers crossed, and I'm very hopeful. We might be a little bit pricey, a little bit overvalued. I put the number at 4%, but there are investors that don't feel comfortable at 4% overvalued, and so they're selling stocks. You're always going to find people that are uncomfortable with the current level, and we certainly are finding that, and they're all kind of moving right now in tandem. But I would not do that. I think if you'd be a sensible, you'd wait and see what the really results of tests are till we find out how serious this is and whether it's going to lead to problems, lockdowns of the variety we saw in March and April of 2020. I'm crossing my fingers that that's not going to be the outcome. And the second thing I would say is, even if that is the outcome, we've learned a lot about how to deal with pandemics in the meantime. So I don't think you'd get the magnitude of lockdowns that we saw then. And the other thing that I would mention, and I mentioned this with, just worrisome about it, is I think about Federal Reserve policy in the United States, or quite frankly, central bank policy around the world. And I think what this does is it shows you how serious the virus still is, how unpredictable it still is, and how big a risk it still is to the global economy. And so I think to some extent, there's a trade-off here. And the trade-off is it probably puts the Bank of England's increase in interest rates on hold. And it certainly, I think, will cause the Federal Reserve to postpone tapering in the U.S., and that would mean postponing raising interest rates in the U.S. So there is that sort of positive feature to this. It puts central bank policy, not completely on hold, but somewhat on hold until we get the answers. So investors, central bankers, they have to wait. We all have to wait to see what we have, to get more information, more fundamental information, so we can make sensible decisions.
We have to wait. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we need to leave that to the experts. Thank you so much, Hugh, for joining us today. We hope it won't be the worst, but it's definitely a reminder that COVID-19 is very much there. So what do we know about the new variant so far? We know that it has more mutations than any other variant discovered in its spike protein. We know that South African officials have said that they're very concerned. They think it's a variant of concern and have hence referred it to the World Health Organization. And scientists in that country also believe that the spike in cases that they have seen could have been caused by this new variant. What we don't know for sure is whether it escapes the immunity provided by previous infections or by vaccinations. And that really is the key question, isn't it? We always knew that new mutations of the COVID-19 were going to come around. Is there enough cause as of now to panic? Because what we've been seeing around the world, frankly, is panic. Many countries shutting down their borders to flights from South Africa and travelers from South Africa, as well as other countries where the variant has been detected. We are also seeing global markets respond in this way. But let's talk about what we know as far as the science is concerned, and also in the Indian context, which has so far been doing relatively well, because the most prevalent variant around the world so far has been the Delta variant, which we've already suffered from in our second wave and have now come to a sort of a plateau kind of stages as far as new daily infections go. So to get more perspective on this, I'm joined now by Dr. Laharya. Dr. Shashank Joshi is with us on the show today, as is Dr. Sunila Garg. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India Development Debate. Dr. Laharya, let me begin by just getting your understanding of this new variant, which will possibly be called NU. Do you think there is valid concern over what has been observed in it so far?
So what we know that there are around 50 mutations in this variant, of which 30 are in the spike protein. We also know that once the mutations are there in spike protein, which is required to attach virus to the surface and cause infection, there is a possibility of increased transmissibility. And then our spike proteins are the same thing against which a vaccine antibody are directed to. So there is a possibility that if there is a mutation in a spike protein, and that to number, so the vaccine might not be that effective. Putting both of these together, it is definitely something which should be examined further to understand whether there is a change in the transmissibility or a response to the immunity or antibody created by vaccine, but we do not know. And this is a standard process. But what we need to remember that we have learned from the experience in last so many months that as and when there is a variant emerging, it needs to be thoroughly examined. And as WHO does, it puts initially variants under observation, then variants of interest and variants of concern. So this is a variant which has been identified and which has been one of the key factor which is concerning for some is that of the total genomic sequencing done in South Africa, around 90% plus are of this variant, and which is really surprising. But we should be mindful that the number of variants which have been examined is around 100 odd variant. So we cannot compare with what happened in the previous variant in the past, but definitely this is something which should be examined because we are in the middle of the pandemic and we would be preventing any such upsurge by identifying any variant which could be potential threat. If it's not threat, it will be good, but we should definitely aggressively examine the clinical factors and other relevant details about this variant.
So far, there's no official word, but what government sources are saying is that no case of this new variant, the South African variant, for lack of a better term right now, has been detected within India. Let me go across to Dr. Sunila Garg. Now, the concern is that, like in the past, these variants spread rapidly around the world due to international travel, and it is difficult to really pin down where that traveler may have picked up this variant in which country and then landed into yours and spread it around. And flights have been opening up so far. India, in fact, has announced the opening up of even more international flights just today. Do you think that this is a cause of concern? We need to go back and look at who may have come in from South Africa or from all of these vulnerable countries and check for sure that we are safe.
Thank you so much. First of all, I like to say that, health of the flying sector and of other sectors, which are associated with earnings and all, it is also very, very important to open up these sectors. But having said so, it is also important to be very watchful with regard to the travelers which are coming to India, and all the positive cases which we find, which are there on arrival, they should be sent for genomic sequencing also. And already we have Ministry of Home Affairs guidelines also with regard to, the samples which are testing positive in the international passengers, as well as 5% of the community samples have to be sent for regularly for genomic sequencing. On that front, we have, lagged a bit. So that is where it is very important to look at that part. And also, simultaneously from the Indian perspective, I will like to say that we still have done 120 crores vaccines. Still, we have a fair amount of, work which is lagging behind. So we need to quickly go towards, we have a lot of gap between the first and second dose as well. So we need to particularly focus on those states where, we have not even covered roughly around 60 to 70% of the individuals, roughly around 65%, something like states of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh and all that. That is one thing which we need to do on an urgent basis also. That is there. And then also we need to see that we need to remove the vaccine complacency and not to compromise with the COVID appropriate behavior. That is one thing which will take us through at all the times, whether it is variant, whether it is variant of concern, or whether it is variant under investigation, or it was Delta variant, or it is, when we realize all through, the first wave also, what protected us was the mask, which is a very important social vaccine. I will say that we need to stress upon COVID appropriate behavior and faster pace of vaccination.
Yeah, but let's be honest, and Dr. Joshi, let me come to you on this, because the fact is that COVID appropriate behavior has been loosened up. There have been relaxations. People are going about their lives in a more, close to normal situation than before. In fact, Maharashtra also announced that they would be opening up schools from first standard onwards in urban areas. Do you think that we need to continue with this pace in light of this new variant, or is there cause to pause and relook at some of our relaxations?
No, I think there is no need to get into any panic or knee-jerk reaction. As both my panelists have very clearly said, that there is a reason for concern and red flag for scientists. It was a scientific community at large which had a red flag, because this so-called variant, let us look at actual number of cases. 77 cases from South Africa, 4 cases from Botswana, 2 cases from Hong Kong. As we talk, 1 case, a Malawian traveler in Israel. That is all the number of cases which have been reported. So based on such a small sample size to create a panic and change our current policy is incorrect. At the same time, we cannot see, this is the first variant on planet Earth to threaten the Delta. Delta has clearly dominated. So why the scientists got a little panicky? In South Africa, there were 2 major strains. Their primary strain was Beta, which was being very rapidly replaced by Delta. In the last 2 weeks, a Gauteng province saw a sudden surge of this current strain. And that laid a red signal, and that is why they made this public disclosure yesterday. And I think there are a couple of points which you need to understand from this current strain, why we need concern. Number one is that every virus has spike proteins. These mutations on receptor binding domain, the N-terminal domain, will have resistance to the therapeutic monoclonal antibodies and neutralizing antibodies. The cleavage site has clusters of mutations, which will allow higher transmissibility. Also, it will evade immunity because of a NSP6 mutation. And also the nucleocapsid mutations will allow increased infectivity. So clearly, this is something better or more superior to Delta, which can replace Delta. Right now, Delta has been the dominant strain. Delta derivatives are there. There was good news from Japan. For example, in Japan, the Delta got self-destroyed. We were hoping that even in India, the Delta derivatives which are coming, or the daughters and grandchildren of Delta, were much weaker. But unfortunately, this strain, if it enters countries like India, it can create a havoc. Also remember, both the Hong Kong patients were double vaccinated. All the 4 patients of Botswana were double vaccinated. So there could be immune escape. So I think it is important to be vigilant, but not panic. And from an India standpoint, we have our public health in order. I think our systems are in place. So, but I agree with you that see it's airborne virus. So we cannot not mask. See, we have to open up. I am not saying that we should not open up. We should open up our schools.
But Dr. Joshi, should we be quicker in doing things like banning flights from these countries, or passengers who have traveled to these flights, areas? Right now, what we have as of now is a list of 12 countries.
I think quarantining.
Let me just complete my question. Because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. At this point, shouldn't we have a protocol that if a new variant is found, and it could be one of concern, and the WHO is looking into it, meanwhile we start going through our passenger logs, which are all available, and see and check if any of those people have got symptoms, and if they could be harboring this variant? Don't you think we need to move at that level right now?
I think, you see, what we need to do is, from those geographies of concern, which are potential concern, we can at best do institutional quarantine and keep them under vigilance. I think banning of flights is too extreme a measure. Let us wait for the verdict from the WHO scientists, and let us be not into a proactive or a reactive mode. I think India has done reasonably well in terms of their actions globally as well. So I personally feel that we had the Delta strain and we were virtually isolated from rest of the world. When the Delta strain was prevalent for the last couple of months, it's only now that we are opening up. So you're absolutely right. If there are people coming from South Africa or Botswana or those 12 geographies of concern, and if one is developing symptoms, there will definitely be genomic sequencing done, which is already in place through the Instagog with different central institutes in place. I'm reasonably certain that there is no major cause for panic. But yes, our public health apparatus is already on hypervigilance, and our health secretary has already written to all the states for alerting them on the current strain and being vigilant at all the ports of entry so that these passengers can be screened, detected, diagnosed, and isolated. Remember, we do not know the clinical outcomes of this strain. We don't know whether it is a fatal strain. We have not seen any mortality of the strain. The data is very scant. So on basis of some 100 cases, to raise such an alarm may not be appropriate.
Yeah.
At the same time, we cannot be complacent.
No, of course. My question is, what do we do now in terms of preventive policies? Dr. Laharya, let me bring this question to you, because we're seeing a lot of countries around the world are reacting by just shutting down their borders to people coming in from those areas, or going into institutional quarantine, etc. Do you think India needs to do that as well? Because even though we have vaccinated very rapidly, there is still in absolute numbers a large proportion of our population which hasn't received a single dose. Many who have had only one dose. And we really can't afford possibly another, highly transmissible variant in this country.
What we need to remember that the emergence of a new variant is not a surprise for anyone. Like for last many months, we are hearing and the argument is being made that we should be prepared for new variants, and that's why people need to be vaccinated. The only way of stopping the emergence of new variant is that we stop the transmission of virus. But we know that has not happened, and in many parts of the world, the transmission is ongoing. So emergence of new variant is something which we were waiting for. This is attributable to the improved genomic sequencing and better understanding of the science. That's why we have identified, and this variant has been identified. Now the actions which should be done should be commensurate to the stage of this thing, and that's what the WHO does. It identifies initially a variant is reported, which is put under variants under observation, and then it is being examined. And once the clinical features, other details of variants are available, it will be classified as variant of interest and then variant of concern. So we should be doing the measures depending upon which stage of examination it is. So I would say doing any strict measure or stopping the flight will be little too early. That way, there would be many other variants which will be reported from other parts of the world. We are not going to do that. Okay. That's why the classification is. But coming to the final part, this is a reminder. The emergence of variant is a reminder that we should be, the people who have not got vaccinated or not received their second shot should be urgently going to receive their vaccine, because the only way we can fight, people get vaccinated, and we keep following COVID appropriate behavior. Even if India is reporting 10,000 cases, but we should protect ourselves against other variant emerging from other parts of the world. That's why we should follow COVID appropriate behavior of masking, physical distancing, and washing. And that's why we should remember.
You know, my question is it now time to also talk about boosters? Let me go to Dr. Garg on this, and then I'll come back to you, Dr. Laharya. For those who have received the vaccine 9 months ago, your health workers, those above the age of 60, immunocompromised people, do they at least now need booster shots, even as we try and cover a larger number of people? And let me just add one more point to that. Those who are still vaccine hesitant, do we now need to make it difficult for these people not to take vaccines?
Number one thing is that, as you pointed out, that about the boosters part, you see, from a public health perspective, I will like to say that our vaccination strategy has to be smart and strategic. That means we do have sufficient number of people who have not been vaccinated. You yourself mentioned with regard to first dose as well. So we really need to look at from that perspective, and we need to look at state-wise. Number two, once we have made enough progress in that direction, then, you know, NTG is also having a meet very shortly within this 2 weeks, coming weeks, you know, so they're going to decide upon the booster part. But as I say, it's a question of equity and equality. And it's not only across, you know, the world, but it is across within the country as well. So, you know, this is the scenario what we are talking today of Africa is because, you know, 2 doses have been given to approximately 40% of the individual, 30% of the individuals, and basically 1 dose has been received by 40%. So Africa is also trying to expedite its pace of vaccination, which they were not doing so. And also the concern is because earlier they were seeing 100 cases a day, today they are seeing approximately 1,200 cases. So it is very, very important now to think strategically in terms of equity and equality, one world, one health, so that people should receive at least 2 doses of vaccine. And you see what we see in UK or in America and all, you know, basically, despite the concept of one world, one health, the countries never, you know, prefer to do so. Rather, they started giving boosters. It would have been much better if they would have given to, you know, different countries. That is one thing which we have to keep in mind. See, we are safe if others are safe. That is one of the important perspective from a public health which the countries need to follow. And the same is true for our own country. We say that lot of vaccine is within the, you know, private sector which is available. Today is the era of drone. It is not that we will let the vaccine expire. It should be immediately transferred to the next state. Look at the state of Bihar, or look at the state of Uttar Pradesh, which I already mentioned, or the northeastern states and all that. So where you see that if we are supposed to vaccinate 200% people, we are doing only 60 to 70%. So we need to look at that part. So, you know, coming to this whole thing, there is, I'll see that we need not
we need to press the accelerator.
Yeah, we need to be vigilant. We need to press the accelerator.
So we need to press the accelerator on vaccinations. Just Dr. Laharya, I want to talk about those who are not vaccinated yet or choosing not to be vaccinated yet. And let me explain the context. The context is what is happening in Europe, where the dominant variant is still Delta, where enough of the population has been vaccinated, like a majority, but still they're seeing the worst phase of the pandemic. Germany, for example, in complete panic mode. Austria, for example, and that is because they still have too many people who are unvaccinated. They're taking stringent measures against those who are unvaccinated. Do you think that needs to be emulated at some point?
what we need to remember that we cannot look at only vaccination status. We, in epidemiology and public health measures, we have to look at the context also. And context for European setting is that they started vaccination before Delta came to their setting. In India, Delta infected people first and then vaccination starting. So these are the two different settings. We know with around 70% of seropositivity after the second wave and 82% of population receiving one shot, India's setting is very different. But that is not to say that people should not be vaccinated. People need to come for first shot and second shot. So that situation is very different. Of course, what is happening in Europe and United States should be watched carefully. Context need to be examined. But I would not say that we should be unnecessarily worried or concerned. India's setting is very different. And the same concept is applicable for the booster shot. Nobody is saying that booster would never be required. It would be required at some point of time and for some group of people. But we right now cannot say that when that booster will be required. 3 quick points. One, the booster, whenever we are talking about booster, we need data. And for the vaccine being used in India, Covishield and Covaxin, there is not enough scientific data on how booster works in this. Even UK is using booster, but it is using a different vaccine than for the booster shot. In India, we don't have that data. Second, the operational priority had to be, there is far more benefit of giving first and second shot than the booster. Third is that there had to be a certain time lag between giving first primary schedule and booster. Since India did majority of vaccination in the second part of this year, so there would be still some long time before booster can be considered. Of course, a nuanced approach of additional shot for immunocompromised people or what can be done, some of the health workers which are high risk, is something required more nuanced approach by technical expert, but that would not be in the broader approach of booster shot which we are discussing.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we need to start talking about this at this point with a new variant on the horizon. Key takeaways as we wrap this discussion, and important to sum up. No need to press the panic button right now. We have few cases that have been detected. What is concerning about it is that it has much more mutations in its spike protein. So there are concerns that it could impact those who are vaccinated already as well and could spread faster. We still don't know the complete data on it. Does it mean that we can just shrug our shoulders and, let down our guard? Absolutely not. Maybe we need to get a little more stringent than we've been so far. The break that we've sort of had, thinking that the worst is over, may not necessarily be the case. So it's time to take up vigil once again. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show today.